It's the Brad and John Show.
The Brad and John Show. This is the B block. Today's date is June 5th. 5th day of June, 5th day of the Lou Information Station, KLIS AM 590. Check it out, or the Lou Info, or just louinfo.com. John, Niall Stevens. Niall Stevens. Do you know who he is?
Yeah, no, wait a minute. Is he the guy that I mentioned yesterday on our show that I tout frequently, Brad? You mean that same Niall Stevens?
Niall Stevens. Yes, that's the guy.
And now you mentioned this in A Block. What is the Niall Stevens thing?
Niall Stevens. It's just. I think it's important we mention that name. Okay. I find it. See, all these crazy, stupid bills they threw the legislature. I have talked about this for years because, unfortunately, I have been the victim of this twice. Where I used to live was an island in an unincorporated island of St. Charles County, surrounded on all sides by St. Peter's. The crap transmitter site is an island, unincorporated Warren County island, 8 acres of unincorporated Warren County, surrounded by the village of Three Creeks, which is like the best kept secret in the state of Missouri. And for those of you people, and it's so funny, if you are a third generation Washingtonian, you live in Washmo, Washington, Missouri, and I say to you, and I've done this many times, and it's interesting, my family's been here since the 1800s. And my question to them is, if you drive north on 47 out of Washington, across the Missouri River Bridge, and you're into Warren County, what city are you in? And they all look, well, you're not in any city. That's just Warren County. You're in the village of Three Creeks, which is a secret village, okay? The reason I mention this is because, to me, there's a fascinating story that was on the front page of the Post-Dispatch yesterday about this big controversy with the St. Charles Convention Center. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I did read this piece. I thought it was great, and it had a magical cover photo of some African-American women dressed in some sort of cosplay garb. Did you see that?
Yes, and this is another perfect example of this crazy thing that would be taken care of if some state rep or some state senator, and I proposed this to many state reps and many state senators, and they look at me like, huh, what are you talking about? If you get an official map of St. Charles County, and you think you're in O'Fallon, Missouri, chances are you may not be. There are all these crazy, like, for example, the guy who used to be the economic director for St. Charles City St. Charles. I was at a meeting where he talked about this, that in the city of St. Charles, there are like over 100 unincorporated islands of St. Charles County within the city limits. So, and he talked about one perfect example, and I do remember this. There was this terrible murder where I think it was 2 brothers were murdered in a house, and the St. Charles City Police showed up, and they started doing the murder investigation, and somebody says, oh, hold on a minute, this house isn't in St. Charles City, it's in an unincorporated St. Charles County. And the reason for this is, and I was at another meeting where a couple of St. Peter's aldermen joked about this, where the fact that there is a mobile home court right off of, I can't remember what the name of the street is there. It's right across the street from the Palace of Justice there in St. Peter's, where the new courtroom and everything like that. And that is it's surrounded by St. Peter's, but it's unincorporated St. Charles County. And one of the aldermen says, well, there's a reason why that's not in St. Peter's. Okay, they do this selective annexation. And the example of this is the St. Charles Convention Center and the hotels is in the city of St. Charles, but across the street where the people live is unincorporated St. Charles County because it's not the nicest neighborhood. There used to be a mobile home court on there in the corner. That's gone now, the whole bit. So the problem is, if they get a big turnout at the St. Charles Convention Center and the parking lot fills up, the people park in the neighborhood and they park in these people, in front of these people's houses. And sometimes they park their driveways, and sometimes they block the driveways. And sometimes, in this case, the article talked about there was an anime convention and a lady found a guy dressing to be, what was he dressing to be, a fox in her front yard or something?
Yeah, and he dropped his drawers and he was down to his skivvies.
Right. He's in his underwear putting on his fox anime costume or his furry costume, whatever, so he could go to the convention center. So the interesting part of this is, and if you read the article, and John, you always, criticize me for sometimes embellishing things. Didn't this sound feel like, well, and nothing against Dan Borgmeyer, no Dan. Dan's like, hey, not our problem. And the county's going like, well, it's our problem. And Dan's going, we tell these people not to park over there, but they do. But we can't do anything because we're the city and that's the county. Do I pretty much have the article sort of synopsized?
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I think that and I don't remember if it was the mayor that said this or not, but that flyers are posted and there's plenty of signage.
Yeah.
So, yeah, the city is saying, look, we do what we can to tell people to not park there. But, Brad, I've gone there for Monsanto used to have a huge thing there every year, and I have parked on the grass nearby because the parking lot was full.
Right. But see, John, there's a method to me bringing up this crazy story. Okay. The method is, I said this years ago, and if you go back and look at the history of the Family Arena, if it's sort of a bizarre story. I know way too much about this, and don't ask me why I know this much about it. But if you know the history of the Family Arena, the property was originally purchased by one of the gambling companies when they were trying to get the gambling, license for the city of St. Charles, and they bought the property and they pulled it out of the floodplain. They did all sorts of work and they put landfill in there and they pulled the property out of the floodplain. And then when their company did not get selected for the casino, and whoever it was way back when, it wasn't the current owner, but they essentially either gave the property to St. Charles County or charged them a small amount and they got the property. And then a group called Family Arena Management Entity, which was some high-flying St. Charles Countyans, and the county went into a joint venture, and they built the Family Arena. Well, do you know what it's actually sort of a bizarre, weird story. Do you know what was the thing that blew up the relationship between the private entity, and St. Charles County?
I don't.
Okay. Joe Ortworth, for whatever reason, hated the Family Arena. Now, what I find fascinating about this is they built a 9,000-seat arena. Okay, how many counties? Do you think that if someone said to St. Louis County or Franklin County or Jefferson County or on the other side of the river, Madison and St. Clair Monroe County, do you think if they say, hey guys, how would you like to have a 9,000-seat arena in your county? How many of them would say, yes, 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 right? Wouldn't they?
All of them, they would love to have that kind of a facility. So why didn't Ortworth like it? Is it because it wasn't his idea? Why was that?
I have no idea. And the interesting part of this is, nothing against Steve Ellman. Steve Ellman is no fan of the Family Arena either. He's tried to sell it numerous times, okay? But here's what happened. They ran into they didn't have a good, and matter of fact, even to the point where there's somewhere you pull these news clips out of nowhere on Facebook. Somewhere there's a press conference where he actually is in front of there like doing a ribbon cutting, and he says, I'm not really for this arena. I'm going like, okay, dude, you're the county executive. You're cutting the ribbon on a beautiful 9,000-seat arena, and you're not happy with it. Okay, here's what happened. He didn't like the fact that the county couldn't really control it because it was this joint venture, and the Family Arena Management Agency, did all the bookings. How do I know this? Because my radio station, the radio station we're on right now, the very radio station, promoted the very first event at the Family Arena. We dealt with the Fame organization, and here's a trivia question for you, John. What concert was the very first use of the Family Arena?
You've told this story before. Was it Kelly Clarkson?
John Cougar Mellencamp. Okay, John Cougar
Mellencamp.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think eventually he dropped the Cougar and just went by John Mellencamp.
Right, John Mellencamp. Right. Okay. So Family Arena's moving along. Fame's running it. They're doing fairly well. The Missouri River Otters are doing well. We did them. Matter of fact, the opening night they sold the place out, 9,000 people. Well, they had an event. I can't remember if it was New Year's Eve or something like that. They had what they called I believe it was New Year's Eve. They had what they called a lock-in. Your kids aren't old enough to be in lock-ins yet, are they? Are you there, John?
Yeah, but I did them when I was a kid. Yeah, I remember lock-in.
Okay, you know what a lock-in is. Essentially, lock-in is a party where you come and you stay overnight, and they lock the doors, and the police are there, and they have security so that nobody sneaks out, and nobody can get in, stuff like that. So your kids are safe. So they had this lock-in, and the people who are running it put 55-gallon trash bins out at the doors with plastic liners in them. And there was a sign that says, "No illegal drugs allowed. Put all illegal substances in this bag or you will not be allowed in." So the news organizations came out and saw this. Oh, look at this. And they took pictures of these bins, these, plastic bins with the sign on it that says, "Drop your drugs here." You can't. So the news organizations, Channel 4, Channel 5, Channel 2, they all did it. Oh, look at this. There's drugs in St. Charles County. People who were going to the lock-in, they had to drop their drugs in the bins. And the crazy part of it is, and I have a friend of mine that worked there that night, he said there was nothing in there. So there wasn't anybody throwing any drugs because they didn't have any drugs. Well, this blew up, and Joe Ortworth popped a gasket. And he essentially got into this big fight with the Family Arena management entity, Fame. And he declared that, and this made national news, that he was going to personally approve any event at the Family Arena. And if there was a rock group that was playing there that had some kind of demonic lyrics in their music, or if they said the F-bomb in their music or the S-bomb, or they said disrespectful things about whomever, he was not going to allow them to perform at the Family Arena. So essentially, this became a national story. Here's the St. Charles County executive who's essentially, and it came out the fact that Joe Ortworth is, guess what he is, John? He's the same thing as me. Guess, you know what that is? John's gone again.
What's that?
He's a pastor. Okay? Did you know that about Joe Ortworth?
I did. Yeah, I knew that. Yeah, I asked you what it was. Yeah, so you're both pastors, and he got a real one. You got an online one, right?
Yes, but it turned it, and then Joe went ape poop on this, and to the point where it just got to be, and the crazy part of it is, the reason why I know too much about this, at the time we were doing sports with the various teams with our station. We were doing the play-by-play for the Otters and who was it, the Swarm, and a bunch of other teams that were like all these smart business people that wouldn't spend $5 if they didn't have to, but yet they are spend $1 million to bring in some stupid minor league team that's not going to,
old grudges. We got it.
That's not going to do anything. So that's the whole crazy thing. So that's my long explanation of saying I have said all along that St. Charles County should have built the convention center next to the Family Arena because it has a monstrous parking lot. Even if you made the Family Arena, even if you put the convention center next to the current Family Arena, there's still, I don't know, I think there's like 8,000 parking spaces there. You'd never have this problem. And more importantly, if you've ever been down to downtown when they have something at the convention center, where if it's like a big convention, the old home shows used to be like this, the old car shows used to be like this, they would open up the floor to the dome. So in other words, you would go through the actual convention spaces in the convention center, and you go down this hallway, and bango, bingo, you're on the floor of the dome. So, and you could have done the same thing with the Family Arena, where you could have this huge floor space where you could have all sorts of exhibits and stuff like that. And there are several conventions that have used the downtown area like this, where they've used the convention space for, I think a couple of religious groups have been there like that. And then they have the big concerts where they have the Christian rock bands up there and playing in the dome. And, they do that at night, and during the day they're in the convention space the whole bit. But no, they wouldn't do that because, you know why, John?
Why is that? Oh, because is it regionalism?
Exactly, because, well, you're St. Charles City, we're St. Charles County, we're not going to cooperate with you. And which brings me back to where we started. Here we have the St. Charles Convention Center, which doesn't have very much parking space, and it's in the city. And across the street is unincorporated St. Charles County. And they just won't get along. Here, hold on a minute. You know what that brings? That brings up?
Let's bring up a PCP addict who has left us.
What would you do with a brain if you had one?
Wrong one.
That's not the right one. How about this one, John?
I don't even know where to start from all of the things that have been said that are just wrong.
That's not
No,
it.
play the only one that you haven't played yet this week, Brad.
I want to say, can we all get along? Can we get along?
Can we all get along? See, I don't get this. I'll never understand this. And you read the article about Dan Borgmeyer. I'm going to call him today, and maybe he'll go on the air with us tomorrow. Would you mind if I get him on the air tomorrow?
Yeah, no, that sounds great. That sounds fun.
Because he's really a good guy. He's very prideful about the city of St. Charles. And he talked about in the article, which is interesting, he talked about they picked up conventions that used to be in downtown St. Louis. And why are they not in downtown St. Louis anymore, John?
Because of crime.
Right. And once again, the city of St. Louis is sitting on, what, $250 million in Rams money and, $50 million in ARPA funds. And they could do exactly what Springfield, Missouri did. They could run ads in other cities. Springfield, Missouri, for a while, ran a big ad campaign here in St. Louis looking for police officers. They're essentially saying, hey, come to Springfield. It's a great place to live. Be a police officer, make a difference. The city of St. Louis could be advertising all over the Midwest. Hey, come to the city of St. Louis, make a difference in the city. But what do, John? They don't do squat because they say, oh, we don't like those police. Yeah, we don't have that many of them anymore. And that's good. Matter of fact, we hope that half the force retires, and then we'll have less police, which will be even better, right?
I think that probably a lot of people that live in that neighborhood, though, like to see grown men or women in their skivvies and fox outfits. Don't you think, though, Brad? I mean, that could be a draw for some people.
But you know what? I interviewed that guy, the guy who was the fox, and I said,
yeah, and what did he say? Did he quote something from The Wizard of Oz for the 5th time?
No, I said, what does the fox say? And he went, doo 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 doo.
There you go, Brad.
John, you walked right into that one, man. I'm telling you.